What two considerations were most influential in your decision years ago to commit to seminary and a career in ministry?
What was the beginning? What did you say?
What two considerations?
Two considerations.
So my experience was when I first walked into a Unitarian Universalist congregation when I was 16, I felt this alignment between this thing that I had always been doing as a kid and as a young person, which is trying to create the container for us to have different experiences. And I found in the church that I could do that for the really broad swath of human experiences. So it wasn't limited to just one part of reality. It was inviting our bodies, our spirits, our minds. And so there was like a deep alignment for like who I was before. And then the second consideration before I committed to seminary was I wanted to go somewhere where I wouldn't have a lot of debt. It's practical, but it's real. I wanted to kind of come out of seminary with the freedom to serve the congregation that I felt called to, and not the one that I needed to serve because of kind of economic reality, because seminary is really, really expensive.
That was smart, Sean. I didn't think about that latter thing. I think that I would just quickly say, for me, the first was a sense that like I didn't have to decide what was going to happen after seminary, and that instead I could say I was really clear that seminary was the right next thing for me to learn and grow as a leader and as a person that I wanted to be in the world. So kind of taking the right next step without having to know the whole story. That was really important for me because it was scary. And I was really skeptical about church. And then the second is I got encouragement from my local congregation. I heard from elders in the church a sense that they saw in me a future minister. And that was something that I again, it was scary and I wasn't sure what it exactly meant, but their encouragement really made a big difference.
All right, our next question is this: how do you maintain hope in these pandemic and political times?
You want me to go?
Sure.
I think right now I mean, as a lot of times, I'm not oriented towards hope per se, hope as an optimism, but I am oriented towards a sense that that my continued showing up matters, and that each day trying to find a sense of how I can keep being present to the fullness of the world is my general orientation, the fullness that is in the brokenness and the pain and the goodness, and not try to get too stuck on any one of those things. A lot of what we're talking about that in the orientation of this service is a big part of that, in a sense of remembering that nothing is settled. So that's a big source of hope. And then I see a lot of good. And even though there's a lot that's hard, I also have the chance in my job to see a lot of the goodness in people, and the creativity and the persistence and the love that's really present. And I refuse to see just one part. So that gives me hope too.
Yeah, I'm also not completely oriented towards hope. I feel like hope can also be paralyzing in the same way that hopelessness can be paralyzing. Hope can sometimes give us, an accepting of things happening really slowly, or accepting of unjust conditions or real realities. As we kind of hope that things will get better, we just need to endure. In the same way that hopelessness can paralyze us from, actually taking the steps that we can take. I feel like where I'm most grounded, or at least where I would locate, I think what hope does for other people is finding ways to connect with the eternal, what is true beyond reality, beyond the facts on the ground, beyond the news headlines, and finding kind of my grounding in things that are not going to be unstable, like political change, like political climates, and remembering who I am to the universe, who I am to myself. That really allows me to navigate in ways in which I'm not overwhelmed by the true devastation that is now, that is completely right to be hopeless about what is going on, as it is completely right to have hope because of what you see. I think accepting both those realities is really important. And forcing yourself to feel hopeful, or forcing yourself in even to feel hopeless, I think it's not the right prescription. It's more like what grounds you in what is true, but also in what is possible. And so how do you live those two things at the same time?
So our next question, what do Unitarian Universalists believe about spirituality of animals?
That's a great question. It reminds me that we had said maybe we would do a blessing of the animals through this time, and we kind of missed that. So usually we do it in June. We'll have to come back around to that. Well, just a general caveat in any of these sorts of questions, making any kind of generalized statement about what Unitarian Universalists believe is fraught with complexities and contradictions, and there will always be someone who says, but I don't believe that. And actually, that's a good thing. So with that said, I would say, it sounds like what I would say about God. There's a variety of opinions about what Unitarian Universalists believe about spirituality in animals, or the sense of, can we say inherent worth of animal life. And yet I would say that generally our seventh principle of the interdependent web of all existence affirms a sense of deep interconnectedness and an acknowledgement that we, human life, are just a part of that web. And so in that, there's a willingness of a greater, equalization than you might think, and that sometimes I think we don't fully explore. So, and with that said, I bet there's a whole sermon in this, and that Sean and I have talked about the idea of looking at a family systems that includes pets. So in other words, the ways that often our pets manifest what's going on in the rest of our household or our family system in really interesting ways that we notice when we're working with families, or maybe perhaps in our own lives. So it's another element.
Yeah. It reminds me of that question, like, do dogs go to heaven? Like that question of the value of animals in kind of a worldview system. And I think if any of us have had a deep relationship with an animal, we realize the complexities of being connected to someone, or a being that has a different way of communicating than we do. And it truly is a relationship. It is a mutual practice in which each of us has different ways of supporting the other, especially thinking of like a pet type relationship. And so I think we would also affirm the relationality between us and the non-animal world, to say that there is value in that relationship, and that it is a mutual relationship, and also a complex one. And it, I think, can help us understand dynamics of power and interconnection, and care and consent in ways that both mirror and provide illumination for our kind of human systems.
So our next question is, what if you don't believe that all people are worthy of love without exception.
Welcome to the club most days.
Last night, my mother-in-law was asking me what's the most common question, and at this time, and this is the most common question for these times. Like at least the last 4 years, I feel like this has been a really common question. And it used to be that the version of this before that was like, well, does Hitler have inherent worth and dignity? I found that actually, and I used to say, well, let's not start with Hitler. Let's start with your next door neighbor or your brother-in-law that believes differently than you do, or, that whoever is most, closest in your life that most has the chance to push your buttons. How are you doing on affirming their inherent worth and dignity? I would say actually the last 4 years have, I don't have to make that reminder quite as often anymore, because I feel like these questions are a lot more intimate. And they play out in, which means it's a lot more pressing in terms of the heartbreak of what it means to feel in deep tension about another person's inherent worth, or their shared humanity. So as Sean started with, I think it is something that like we all wrestle with, and to not wrestle with it means you're not actually asking the question or clear about its true implications. But my continued response on this question is just that the stance about inherent worth and dignity is less about someone else's humanity and more about your own humanity, and about recognizing in yourself a stance of a willingness to continue to move towards to seeing the practice of seeing in another someone like you, and that's a commitment that you can make, and that it takes discipline, but it's a choice of how you're going to live your life, and that sometimes that's harder and sometimes it's easier, but that it's not really, it really has nothing to do with whether somebody is making good choices or not. That's the inherent part. It's a sense of shared humanity.
I know our timer's up. I think I've been thinking a lot about generational trauma and the ways that pain and hurt is passed down from generation to generation. And it reminds me of it's the last part of that belonging piece, that there is a way in which the violence that is visited upon us because of our actions, the disconnect that we can experience because of what we've done, usually starts in small places. It starts in childhood with adverse childhood experiences. It is magnified in relationships, and the disconnection just becomes more and more wide. And so part of it is a work of repair, that if we are to say that no one is beyond the work of finding a place of belonging, it helps to bring into the fold, into our community, those who have experienced trauma and who are acting that trauma out in the ways that they are hurting others, in a way that then repairs it. So it's also a stance that is reparative and reminds us that we are creatures of our environment as much as we are creatures with full free will. And so we cause many of the situations that lead to these sorts of actions. And so it's our responsibility to do the work to minimize the harm, but also invite back in for future generations.